Hello and welcome to another round of missions and missiology. Today I'm starting my series on megatrends in missions, and the first one is the shift towards the majority world. The fact that now most of the Christians in the world today live in parts of Africa, South America, and South Asia. So we'll first reflect a little bit on our world today, what it looks like in terms of population dynamics. We'll hear some academic voices that have discussed this topic, and then I want to highlight a few implications that have to do with this massive shift that has been taking place, especially over the last 100 years or so. So first, when we talk about our world, it's an amazing world that we live in, right? With all the different continents, and obviously there are people living everywhere, including in very densely populated areas where the big cities of the world are, including some areas that are not densely populated at all, such as the polar regions and deserts. But interestingly, most of the world's population live in Asia, and more specifically within this circle. And that's not just something that Christians have noted. I think this graphic is something that here that secular scientists have developed. I think I saw it on the Washington Post before, or something like that. And so, yeah, we have this circle where we have Japan, China, India, Southeast Asia, and that's where over 50% of the world's population live. So that's one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about that the West is not the center of Christianity anymore. We are also talking about the fact that just in general, in terms of where people live, the West is not leading. But then specifically when we talk about Christianity, so the number of Christians, and this here, as often is the case with statistics, refers to Christians of all kind, right? So Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, different evangelical, independent type of Christians. But the thing to note is that in 1910, and that's an important date because that's when this important missions conference in Edinburgh took place. And so at that time, the majority of Christians, like 2/3, like 66%, lived in Europe, right, which we see in the dark blue. And then Northern America was also a sizable chunk of that, with 14.9%. And then, also significant population in Latin America, but really Asia and Africa and Oceania were not significant in terms of Christianity. That changed rapidly within 100 years. So now we're 100 years later, in 2010, and Europe is still the largest percentage of Christian world population, and many of them might be nominal and traditional Christians. But anyway, Europe is still at 25%. But then after that comes Latin America with 23.9, and Africa with 21.6, and only then the Americas. So a lot of growth has been taking place in what we sometimes call the majority world or the global South. And that is something that academics have noticed. One of the first was Andrew Walls, who was a scholar from Scotland, I believe, and he went to Africa to teach theology. And as he was teaching theology in Africa, he noticed, and I think also church history, early church history, he taught. And as he was in Africa, he noticed that not only had he something to teach to them, but the African Christians and the African environment also had something to teach to him, specifically that Christianity in Africa was very vibrant, maybe more vibrant than in his home country, in Great Britain. And another scholar that was influenced by Andrew Walls is then an African voice himself, Lamin Sanneh. And then we also have Philip Jenkins, who is teaching at Baylor University and who wrote The Next Christendom, a very influential volume that we'll look at in a minute. Todd Johnson has done a lot of statistical analysis as a scholar at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And then Timothy Tennant has also been writing about the majority world and theology in the majority world as the president of Asbury Seminary. So here we have a quote where it says, "We live at another one of these important transitions in the history of Christianity as we experience the rise of the majority world church and the signs of the possible, although once unthinkable, demise of Western Christianity. Evidence of this development is seen, for example, when we observe where the majority of Christians are now located around the world. This is often referred to as a shift in the center of gravity of the world Christian movement." So that's Timothy Tennant writing in 2007. So it means, you know, he can look back at what people like Andrew Walls and others had already written, right? And by that time, for example, the shift of the center of gravity had become a well-known phrase. And then he elaborates on that by writing, "The statistical center of gravity refers to that point on the globe with an equal number of Christians living north, south, east, and west of that point." Now, often a picture says more than 1,000 words. So this is a picture that shows that center of gravity, right? So in 30 AD, when Jesus died and rose from the dead, let's say when Christianity started, the center of gravity was obviously in and around Jerusalem, because that's where the first Christians gathered. And then Christianity did move in all directions, right? From there, it moved into Africa, west and south. It moved into the Middle East and Asia east. It moved north. It moved towards Europe. But overall, it moved westwards over the next few hundred years. And here, in this area of the world, in what today is Greece and Turkey, there were some of the most important centers of Christianity. But not only here, also east to it, right? In the Middle East and what had been the Persian Empire before, in those areas of the world, getting into Central Asia. Some Christians even made it to China and India. So that's why the center of gravity is west of Jerusalem, but not totally west, right? But then over time, Christianity diminished in North Africa and in the Middle East with the spread of Islam and other developments, such as in China. And so we can see here that in 1500 and 1800 and 1900, we have a stronger movement towards the West. And that's the time when the majority of Christians lived in Europe, and then also increasingly in North America and in South America. And that's why oftentimes Christianity was perceived as a Western religion. Increasingly, towards 1970, people were living in the South, and the Christians were living in the South, such as in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and then we have a reversal, right? Then we have a reversal that the center of gravity is not moving west anymore, but it is moving east and south. And that is something that's happening today, like, you know, in the year 2024 or 2025, and is projected to continue into 2050 and 2100. So Jenkins writes in The Next Christendom, "As Christianity moves south and east, it is returning to its roots," right? So there is, in a way, nothing new about it in some ways, nothing extraordinary about it, but it is still worth noting that it is happening in our time, again, you might say. To use the intriguing description offered by Ghanaian scholar Kwame Bediako, what we are now witnessing is the renewal of a non-Western religion. Founded in the Near East, Christianity for its first 1,000 years was stronger in Asia and North Africa than in Europe, and only after the 14th century did Europe, I should say, did Europe and Europeanized North America decisively become the Christian heartland. So in his book, The Next Christendom, Jenkins offers an overview of where Christianity is today, but he also gives us a historical analysis, right? And he's saying, well, Christianity has always historically been strong in parts of Africa and Asia, and that really strong focus of having Christianity primarily in Europe and Europeanized North America is somewhat of a recent development of the last few hundred years, historically speaking and relatively speaking. Here's another chart that illustrates this. So here we have the percentage of all Christians in the global South from 33 projected into 2100. So when Christianity started in around 33 after Christ or AD, obviously pretty much everybody was in the global South because they were in what we call the ancient Near East, right? In the Holy Land. And then, over time, Christianity also spread into Western parts of the world. And around 923, meaning around 1,000 years, we have a tipping point, right? And this is where Christianity, not theologically, but just demographically speaking, did somewhat become of a Western religion, right? All the way to the 1500s. In the next few hundred years, the percentage of Christians in the global South was diminishing. But of course, the population of people in general in the global South was still very, very large, right? Has always been large, again, because some of the ancient civilizations like India and China, and of course many other parts of the world, always have had a large population. So here again in the gray area, then we see that around 1900 or so, we have a sharp increase of the percentage of Christians in the global South. And then we have another turning point in 1981. And after that turning point, more than 50% of the Christians live in the global South. And this is a trend that is projected to continue and reach higher percentages over the years. So what are some of the implications of this massively important development? One is that generally we need to acknowledge or observe, or we can observe, that Christianity in the West is stagnant or declining, while much of Christianity in the global South is vibrant and growing. However, many theological resources, such as famous seminaries and divinity schools, publishing houses, academic conferences, etc., continue to be located in the West. And so we have somewhat of a strategic imbalance here. And that's also one reason why Western Christianity, in a theological sense, continues to be very influential, because many of the resources are in the West. Now, what about Western missionaries? I would argue that Western missionaries are still needed, but I would also emphasize that their role is changing. Oftentimes, they need to function in partnership with the already existing Christian communities, because in most parts of the world, we now have a significant number of churches, oftentimes very vibrant churches. And again, talking about Andrew Walls and his experience, we're certainly in a position now where Western missionaries might still have something to contribute in terms of certain technical knowledge or certain skills that they have, or just bringing in a different perspective. But overall, we are certainly now in a situation where we also always want to be in a learning position and want to be learning from the churches in countries like Brazil, Nigeria, South Korea, and so on. And I would also emphasize that Christians throughout the majority of the world are moving to the West. Some of them are, right? We got migration movements from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, to European countries, to the US, to Canada, to Australia, and they are bringing their expression of the faith with them. And so again, especially in Europe, oftentimes some of the largest and most vibrant churches are led by pastors and leaders from the majority world. And so I think that is a mega trend that's happening in missions today, that we need to be aware of these things when we're talking about missions in our time. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight today. So I want to thank you for your interest, and I look forward to connecting with you, which could be through my email, which is danieltopp@fuller.edu. And with that, I want to say goodbye for today and many blessings to you.